From Inc.com, this is the Inc. Productivity Tip. Expert opinions, valuable insight, and helpful advice from today's top business coaches, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs. So let's start Friday's edition with a question. As a leader, do you want your message to land? Well, Bernard Coleman says, say less. Now, Coleman, the people leader at Descript, adds, this is not about dumbing it down. It's about designing for how people actually absorb information. Your team doesn't need more info. They need less, delivered better. Coleman once worked at a company that was about to restructure a few departments. Leadership wanted to announce everything in one all-hands meeting. The new org chart, the role changes, the timeline, all of it. Coleman countered that it should be a measured communications cadence spread over no less than 3 messages to ease them into the changes. As a leadership team, they had been working through the effort for months, and it was old news for them. A large contingent of the group wanted to get the info out to people under a fast timeline. Now, what Coleman felt was not taken into consideration was the pace of change they were about to put people through and the impact that it would have on the folks hearing the message for the first time. Now, the goal should always be communication simplicity. Less is more, not less information, but fewer words carrying more weight, delivered at a rhythm people can actually absorb. Every person has an information capacity. When you exceed that capacity, you lose people. And the goal is for the plurality of your audience to understand, especially when communicating significant changes. So, let's say, for example, you're in a room and there is the stench of garbage. If you've been in the room a while, it doesn't smell so bad, if at all. And that's what change is like. You've been sitting with the change and you've gotten so used to it, you may not even notice anymore. But if someone comes into the room, they'll say, whoa, what something stinks in here. And they'll suffer through the smell until they get used to it or not. Now, that's the change curve. And if you dump every detail on someone the moment they walk into that room, they don't necessarily adjust. Sometimes they just leave. Moving people and an organization through a meaningful change is one of the hardest parts of management. The job isn't just to communicate the change, it's to pace it so people can stay in the room long enough to fully absorb it. As a leader, there needs to be a duty of care when taking people through big changes. This is not an abstract principle, but a tactical commitment. Help people move through the waves of change. And there might be some who have a bias for action and just want to unload it and move on. That's easy to understand. After all, you are the leader, and you need people to get with the program. Unfortunately, that's not how people are wired. Too much change can feel like a ton of bricks for the recipients. You have to ask, will they actually absorb this, or will they just hear me talking? Coleman believes in sharing as much information as you can, when you can, but in a streamlined fashion and in common language, rather than overly academic or jargon-laden prose. About 54% of U.S. adults read below a 6th grade proficiency level. Public messaging targets an 8th to 9th grade level, which already sits above where most readers are. And he argues that our capacity to read has only shrunk in the era of short-form communication. We've trained ourselves on texts and tweets and captions. That's just where we are as a society, and we must adjust to meet people where they are. If you're writing internal communications at a 12th grade reading level, you're not being thorough, you're being unclear. Brevity and simplicity are key to making sure the message actually gets through. So, how do you put this into practice? There are a few things that Coleman comes back to again and again. Use the best word, not the biggest word. Not every workplace has the same vocabulary. There may be people who have English as a second language, barriers to understanding you haven't considered. Say use instead of utilize. Say start instead of commence. Do you want to sound smart or do you want to be impactful? Don't bury the lead. Start with your main point, then provide context. Begin with where you want your audience to go, then take them on the journey. Talk to people, not at them. If you're talking at someone, you miss them. If you're talking over them, you've missed them. And remember the curse of knowledge. Once you know something, it's nearly impossible to remember what it felt like not to know it. Leaders reference context that exists only in their heads and assume the room is keeping up. Bridge the gap, use analogies, tell stories, connect new information to what people already understand. The number one goal should be land the message where most all recipients get it. And now, ask yourself 2 questions. Did people retain the information, and did they take action? If the answer to either is no, the communication missed the mark, no matter how well-intentioned it was. Communication simplicity is not about saying less for the sake of it. It's about saying less so the message actually sticks and moves people forward. All right, so let's downshift a gear or two and talk about accountability. Now, you would more than likely say that you value accountability, right? Most leaders do. But what happens the next time something goes wrong on your watch? Suddenly, nobody saw it coming. The data was unclear. The team dropped the ball. The market shifted. Does that sound familiar? There's always an explanation, and it almost never starts with I. Everyone's for it until they're the one who has to practice it. Meanwhile, your best people are quietly burning out from carrying consequences that belong to someone else. Your team has learned to keep their heads down, mouths shut, doing just enough to stay out of the crosshairs. They haven't stopped caring. They've just stopped believing accountability means anything here. And it starts at the top, with you. It's remarkable how rarely it happens and how much changes when it does. So, why does accountability go missing? Part of why it's so rare is that the environment itself may not be safe enough to allow it. If the culture above you punishes honesty, modeling accountability takes real courage because you're not just changing your behavior, you're pushing against a system. That's hard. It's also exactly the kind of leadership that changes organizations. And the higher you've risen, the more the stakes have compounded. Your reputation, your authority, your seat at the table. And so the instinct to protect yourself kicks in. Practicing accountability starts to feel less like integrity and more like a liability. So maybe you deflect, you minimize, you go quiet. Or worse, you redirect blame to the people below you who had far less power to change the outcome in the first place. This isn't about being a bad leader. You've probably watched genuinely good people do this, because fear doesn't care how good your intentions are. And when fear takes over, survival mode sets in. None of us are recognizable in survival mode, not to our teams, not even to ourselves. The leader your organization hired and the one showing up to protect themselves from perceived threat are often 2 very different people. So you're figuring it out as you go, just like everyone else, without a playbook. Your title changed, but the humanity didn't. You have blind spots, you make calls with incomplete information, you get it wrong sometimes. And none of that is the problem. The problem is the pretense of perfection, the cultural expectation that your role means having all the answers and never visibly failing. That expectation doesn't make you a better leader. It makes you a defended one. And the systems around leadership rarely help. Organizations invest in leadership development, but rarely practice leadership support. They evaluate leaders on results while quietly punishing the vulnerability that builds the cultures that produce those results. They promote people into positions of enormous influence and then largely leave them alone to figure out how to wield it. Add a workplace culture that has long equated certainty with competence, and you get leaders who have learned, rationally, from experience, that admitting uncertainty or failure is a risk not worth taking. So they don't. And when the leader doesn't, nobody does. Accountability requires saying the words, not a carefully worded statement crafted by legal, not a passive acknowledgement buried in a town hall, but actual words like, "I got that wrong. I should have caught that sooner. That decision was mine, and it didn't work." When you take genuine accountability, something shifts in the room. Trust moves. Permission is granted, all because you committed to modeling it visibly, consistently, and without spin. You also decided to separate it from punishment and even stopped rewarding the performance of confidence over the practice of honesty. Suddenly, it's safer for your team to be honest, to raise a concern, to admit a misstep before it becomes a crisis. You created that. Ultimately, the version of you that says, "I don't know, let's figure it out," is far more valuable to your culture than the one projecting certainty you don't have. And here's the part nobody talks about. You can't give what you haven't been given space to practice. Real support for leaders looks like ongoing coaching, not just when something goes wrong, but as a standing investment. It looks like peer communities where you can be honest about what you're struggling with without political consequence. It looks like psychological safety at the top, not just championed for everyone else. When you have somewhere to put the fear, accountability has room to grow. And when you model it, really model it, you give your entire organization permission to do the same. That's not weakness. That's the whole job. And it starts with taking accountability for the state of accountability in your team. That's all for this week. This article featured journalism by Bernard Coleman and Leigh Elena Henderson. For more expert opinions from today's top business coaches and thought leaders, go to inc.com/lead. Have a great weekend and come back Monday for another helpful tip or tips from Inc.